So hi, my name is Alyssa Cokinis. I'm actually the production dramaturg for Iowa Summer Reps, The Importance of Being Earnest. Has anyone seen the show yet? Oh, nice. Saw half of it?
It's a long story.
Oh, okay. Are you going to go back and see more?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good, okay. Well, I'm glad there's a happy ending there. So for those of you that don't know, the production dramaturg, a dramaturg is someone who does a lot of historical-based research and helps bring the story in the script to life on stage, kind of in a more like research-based capacity, as I already said. So that was my job. I worked a lot with the director and the actors and making sure they understood like Victorian etiquette, since the play is from the Victorian England time period, and like what references they were making in the script that maybe they weren't aware about. So things they could be aware while they were on stage. And so I have a presentation. Did anyone go to the pre-show talk? Excellent. Great. I'm not repeating myself to anyone then. This is fantastic. All right, so I do have a short presentation on the playwright, Oscar Wilde. And then after I'm done talking about Oscar Wilde, I'll leave it open to like if you have any questions about his life or how his life pertains to his work, The Importance of Being Earnest, or about the show itself. And then after that Q&A, I have some activities planned possibly, so hopefully this will be fun. Great. All right, let's get started. Let me find the space bar. Okay. Oh, awesome. I know, right? So, okay, this is a quote I really feel encompasses who Oscar Wilde really is. God knows I won't be an Oxford Don anyhow. I'll be a poet, a writer, a dramatist. Somehow or other I'll be famous, and if not famous, I'll be notorious. And that's exactly what happened to Oscar Wilde. He became quite notorious. And he was alive during the Victorian era in Victorian England. So on the left, and I do this kind of social experiment in my pre-show talk where I make the last person entering the room fill out a calling card so I can call their name as the aristocracy. But basically, calling cards look like that. They often had like birds or like flowers on it. And it was a way for aristocrats to announce their presence if they were going to a friend or acquaintance's house. So they would give the calling card to the servant who would either call their name out physically, or if the host wasn't taking any guests at that time, the servant would then keep the card so as to give to the host later saying, hey, you had a caller today, and you should probably call back upon them because they came to see you. And this is just one very small Victorian etiquette thing that came out of Queen Victoria's reign in England, which began when she took the throne in 1837. Now, Oscar Wilde wasn't born until 1854, which was actually 10 years after the Irish potato famine. And Wilde, yeah, for those of you that don't know, Wilde's actually Irish and not an Englishman. That's something I learned from something I didn't know when I was 14. And so he was the son of an eye and ear doctor who was his father, and his father worked extensively with the Irish census in order to mitigate the effects of the Irish potato famine. And then Wilde's mother was an Irish social activist writer who wrote under the pen name Speranza and often held a lot of anti-British sentiments in her views. So you can see how Wilde sort of developed this critique of British society from his mother. Wilde also had an elder brother, and he also had a younger sister, Isola Francesca, and it's going to get a little sad here for a second. So Isola died when she was only 10 years old from meningitis and a fever. And Wilde was so distraught by her death, so much so that for the rest of his life, he actually carried around a lock of her hair inside this envelope, and this envelope was even discovered on his person at the time of his death. As you can see up top, it says, "My Isola's hair," and like a little further down, "She is not dead, but sleepeth." Very sad. But despite this, Wilde excelled, especially in school, especially in the study of classics, which won him scholarships to Trinity College in Dublin and then later Oxford University. And it was at Oxford University where Wilde would, as most college kids do, sit around in their rooms and start talking about philosophy and politics and all that fun stuff. Mostly Wilde was doing the talking, and Wilde came up with this philosophy called asceticism, which was the desire for beauty, art for art's sake. And it was this sentiment that he carried with him throughout his career as an artist and just in general as a human being throughout his life. But because Wilde was, a theatrical person, a poet, etc., he couldn't hold down a job very easily. And so he took to doing lecture tours about aestheticism around North America, England, and Ireland? Yep. And these tours were fairly successful, but didn't get him a lot of money. And so he went on to actually write 2 earlier plays before Ernest, although one was so bad it never made it to theaters, and the other was pulled after only a week's showing. So I promise you Oscar Wilde is actually a good playwright. The Importance of Being Earnest is like his best play, but evidently his first few plays were not very good. Well, he married Constance Lloyd in May 1884, and from what I could find in my research, they were described as being nothing short of being supremely happy at being together. They were just very, very pleasant in each other's company, and Wilde often described Constance as like the light of his life in letters he would write to her and to others. And it was during this time that they got married, was beginning to start a family, where Wilde worked for a couple of magazines called the Pall Mall Gazette, and he also worked for the Women's World. And eventually, he also published The Picture of Dorian Gray in 1891. This is not the original cover. And the novel was met with hostile reception, which means Wilde was just so delighted by that because, aesthetic, art for art's sake. No good or bad reception. All reception is reception to his work. But the novel was so controversial and was met with hostile reception because of the subtle gay innuendos it had, and also the fact it was ripping apart Victorian ideals like the concept of virtue. And it was actually the preface to this book and a couple of Wilde's other writings that were used against him in his trials for gross indecency, which I will get to in a little bit here. But despite these allegations, Wilde had his work published and his plays produced. In 1894, he was writing 2 plays. One was called An Ideal Husband, and the other was The Importance of Being Earnest. And this is actually a photo from the very first production of The Importance of Being Earnest in 1895 at St. James Theatre. And this is a very iconic scene from Act 1. This is not a spoiler if you're going to go see the show if you've seen it. This is a very iconic scene in which Algernon is withholding the cigarette case from Jack. But it was during Ernest that Wilde was actually arrested for gross indecency. And the whole reason he was arrested for gross indecency in the first place was a young man named Lord Alfred Douglas, who's there pictured on the right. So Lord Alfred Douglas was actually an undergraduate student when he met the much older Wilde. And Douglas was also the son of the Marquis of Queensberry, which is a really aristocratic title and place in the class system. But basically, the Marquis was actually really abusive towards his family, and Douglas was very defiant about that. He didn't like that his father was abusing his mother and his siblings, and this in turn made the Marquis turn on Douglas even more, so much so that he started targeting Wilde because he knew of the affair between Douglas and Wilde. Before we get into some of the sadder stuff and the horrible stuff about Wilde's life and troubles, I think the reason these two had an attraction and an affair in the first place was that Douglas was really attracted to Wilde's idea of aestheticism, desire for beauty, art for art's sake. And Wilde was really in love with the young student's poetry because Lord Alfred Douglas wrote sonnets, which Wilde considered to be just the highest form of art in ways. And though Lord Alfred Douglas was much, much younger than Wilde, it was actually Douglas who introduced Wilde to the renter, rent boy. In our day and age, we would just call them male prostitutes. But Wilde would give these young lovers engraved cigarette cases, and it was actually some of these cigarette cases that were used as evidence to incriminate Wilde in his trials for gross indecency. Phew, before we get to the trial, let's talk about something good, like The Importance of Being Earnest. So this was the theater the play first premiered at, St. James Theatre in 1895. And for those of you who have seen the play or haven't seen the play, I'm going to describe some characteristics of it that I find really attractive, and that's why I love the play. I love that the play is full of this really awesome epigrammatic wit, which is just like a fancy way of saying like this really concise, quick-witted, like clever funniness to it. And something I really enjoy is listening to how the characters say the lines. And a character may say a line mean the absolute truth and also an absolute lie at the exact same time. And I think that's what makes the play so funny, and that's why the play is classified as a social comedy, because it plays on language like this while also commentating on Victorian ideals and customs, or I should say critiquing Victorian ideals and customs. But sadly, Ernest's first run was marked by the Marquis of Queensberry trying to boycott and scandalize Wilde. On the very first night, on the play's opening night, the Marquis of Queensberry showed up with a ticket with the intention to go up on stage and scandalize Wilde for being a gay man and having relations with his son. Fortunately, the lead actor and the manager of the troupe, George Alexander, who also played Jack Worthing in the original production, found out about this, put a stop to it. The Marquis of Queensberry did not, scandalize Wilde then. However, the Marquis tried again, showed up at another show with a box full of rotten tomatoes. He's really mature. And then the worst one was when the Marquis followed Wilde after a showing of Ernest to one of Wilde's nightclubs. And nightclub doesn't refer to like, woo, party nightclub. It was actually like more of a smoking or like a social gathering where people could have, like basic conversations. I almost said intellectual conversations, but the Victorians didn't like to talk about anything intellectual. That's like a fact. And he left a note at that nightclub for Wilde that read, "To Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite." Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of that, I'm like, man, the Marquis of Queensberry must have been so mad his son was seeing another man. He couldn't even spell the word sodomite right when he really needed to use it. But it was with this controversy that St. James Theatres sadly actually took Wilde's name off the program once Wilde was arrested for gross indecency. As you can see on the left, there's a program where Wilde's name is very clearly still printed. And on the right, obviously there's no playwright listed. And also, the play closed after 83 performances, or only a month's worth of shows, once Wilde had been arrested. Okay, we're going to talk about Wilde's trial. And that's on the right. I love this. It's a newspaper from the time talking. Obviously, they illustrated. They didn't really publish photos, so I just find that fascinating. But, okay. Wilde's first trial was on August 26, 1895, and he was actually found not guilty, and he was freed. However, less than a month later, Wilde was rearrested and tried again on May 20th, and he was found guilty. And this was the statement that the judge made. "It is no use for me to address you. People who can do these things must be dead to all sense of shame. I shall be expected to pass the severest sentence that the law allows. In my judgment, it is totally inadequate for such a case as this. The sentence of the court is that you be imprisoned and kept to hard labor for 2 years." And that's exactly what happened. After his imprisonment, his wife, Constance Lloyd, took their 2 sons to Switzerland and rechristened their last name to Holland so they could avoid further scandal. And Wilde was kept in Reading jail mostly. It was there in Reading jail, actually, that he wrote a really, really long letter titled De Profundis, and the only way he could get a paper and a pen to begin with was to bribe the prison guards, one day for a piece of paper, another day for another day for a pen. But it was there he finally penned this extremely long letter to Douglas, which blames Lord Alfred Douglas for his imprisonment in the first place. And this was obviously published after it was found after Wilde's death. But despite this, Wilde was released from jail exactly 2 years after he was taken in, after serving time for hard labor. After jail, Wilde traveled around Europe, mostly France, writing under pen names, but he never really recovered mentally and physically from his imprisonment. And so that inspired him to write an essay for the UK's Daily Chronicle about the cruelties of prison life. And it was actually this essay by Wilde that brought about prison reform and the Prison Act of 1898 throughout Britain. Despite this, Wilde died on November 30th, 1900 in a hotel in France. He was surrounded by friends, including Lord Alfred Douglas, who he had reconciled with in his years out of jail, and he died from cerebral meningitis. He never saw his sons again. While we're here, I've never read this. This is a note I wrote for the actors in their packet, and I feel like this is the basis for my research, and I just wanted to share that with you tonight. My two most valuable and heart-wrenching resources have been biographies of Wilde by his son Vivian Holland and his grandson Merlin Holland. Wilde never knew his grandson and was estranged from his oldest son and Vivian in the last years of his life due to his wife Constance taking the children away from England following his court sentence for gross indecency. Wilde never saw his two sons after that. These works touched me the most in my research because in the text that they are writing, it is clear that of their passion to know their father and grandfather despite all that transpired before, during, and after his prison sentence. It is clear in the words I read, though, that no matter what decisions Wilde made or what came his way, he loved his sons and cherished his family bond deeply. Constance taking the children away broke his heart near the end of his life, perhaps even more than the betrayal by his Lord Alfred Douglas that actually landed him in jail. It should not all be sad, though. After all, Wilde cherished the comedy found in societal expectations and upbringing. Though tragedy plagued his life in some instances, Wilde was a man of comedy, commentary, and building connections through his writings, particularly through his plays. He sought to show the absurdity or the artifice of the life around him and found refuge in his fictional works, which felt more real to him than what surrounded him at times. Oscar Wilde became a martyr of sorts, but he is more than that. He was simply a man who had dreams and aspirations of his own, who wanted to expose Victorian society for all its flaws, who was loved by his sons even after his sentencing, who was loved by his grandson he never knew. Wilde's life may have ended quite tragically, but his legacy is that of using comedy and laughter to bring people together in order to bridge the gaps between class differences and, in our current age, different ideologies and perspectives. I hope this will be useful in your acting journeys or in your listening journeys. So, one last quote before I start taking questions about Oscar Wilde. Humanity takes itself too seriously. It is the world's original sin. If the caveman had known how to laugh, history would have been different. Great. I'll be taking questions. I don't know how to raise the lights, but, oh, perfect. That worked out well. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Oh, yeah, we have to use the microphone, so you have to speak into the microphone.
Right.
I should mention that first.
I was curious, especially with a lot of the, looking at the upper classes and stuff in the play, whether Wilde himself was a member of that class or not, and how that affected his work.
Yeah, so Wilde definitely played the part and attended their parties and gatherings and the clubs and stuff. Which I find very ironic because he was so determined to make fun of it, but he definitely was participating in it and wanted to make more money in order to attend those parties, even more than he was. So, does that answer your question? Sort of.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Making fun of it. He was making fun of it, but also
participating in it. Yeah.
So he's also able to laugh at himself and such too.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I've heard people say that Algernon was in some ways very much like Wilde himself.
Yeah, I was just actually about to say that too. For those of you who had seen the play, the character of Algernon is kind of a mixture between Wilde and Lord Alfred Douglas. The character Algernon used to be named Alfred before he changed it to make people less suspicious. But yeah, kind of a melding of those two who both really despise the class system but totally were a part of it. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure your question was heard, but I think you gave enough of her question.
Oh, okay.
I didn't turn it on. So what's the history of the play's performance? So when he died, has the play been performed ever since he wrote it?
Yeah, there was probably a 20 or 30 year period, I think, where it wasn't performed just because of the stigma of him being tried for gross indecency and being gay. So I think people were less willing to perform it. I'm pretty sure by the late 30s, there was a performance going on in the United States that I know of
So not until then.
Yeah, there was like a little bit of a gap. And he did actually do a lot of revisions to the play after he got out of jail. He revised a lot of his works. It was almost like he knew he only had like 4 or 5 more years to live out of jail, and he's like, I will revise all of my works. But yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to talk tonight.
You're welcome.
So my question is about Wilde's philosophy of aestheticism. To what extent did the public know about that and go and see his plays for that reason, to embrace that, or did they enjoy his work for other reasons?
I can't say for sure. I haven't come across research saying like people went because of aestheticism, but I can imagine he talked about it at dinner parties probably quite frequently, to the point where his like inner circle and maybe a few people of the outer circle were like aware that he thought this way. And he also clearly kind of outlines this in his preface to Dorian Gray as well, this kind of aesthetic quality he saw in his work. Yeah, he definitely, I don't think people knew, but he definitely talked about it. He was a big talker.
Thanks.
Do you have other questions? Nope. Wait.
Another question.
Great, thank you. And I was wondering some too, especially I know as a theater major and studying this also in some of our coursework, that a lot of the play is filled with like more subtle like references that you wouldn't understand unless you were also like gay at the time. But I was wondering how much that was really caught on to, and if the audience was really able to pick up on that, or if it was very like only very select audience members who were gay and would keep it quiet anyway understood like a lot of the jokes.
Yeah. Again, I'm not super sure. I would imagine, because the play was pretty popular when it opened and declined in popularity after his arrest was made public. I think the general audience either didn't know those references or didn't care because it was funny. But yeah, the subtitle for the play is A Trivial Comedy for Serious People. So I feel like a lot of people went into this play not really knowing what it was, even at the time. And I think today a lot of people go into this play and don't understand like how like integrated some of these references are. Like I know when I was telling someone earlier today, when I read the play as like a high school student, I wasn't like, that was even me, sorry. We were talking about this before the talk. We weren't taught like that there were like gay references and stuff throughout the entire piece, and that there was these things about Victorian society throughout the entire piece. It was more just about the general like class system. So I'm really now this is turning into I'm really thankful for my opportunity to really delve into the script, because I think these things are important to know, and I think for productions to just be like, let's have a good play of Ernest, and not really knowing what's the other layer beneath it kind of defeats the purpose of the play itself.
No, I agree. And I know that, especially discussions with some of the actors as well, that they've made very much a study of that and incorporate it to a certain extent into the work as well, which I enjoy and I think is good acting on their part.
I think so too. Very effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet. Any other questions?
So does the play hold up?
Oh yeah, it's good. You should see it. I think something I've really enjoyed about this play is it just reminds me a lot of how different and divided we are today, and how sometimes we just need a little bit of comedy to bring us all together. So, yeah. Yes, young man in the gray shirt.
Hello.
Hello.
How old was Oscar Wilde when he died, and how old do you think he is in those pictures?
Oh, great question. The ones where he has longer hair, that's like his younger self. And then let me go back to, that's like young. He was older in this picture. And they had an affair for 4 years. But he died, why don't I know the age he was when he died? He was very young, like 40, I think. Yeah, about 40, 45, 55. I can't do math. In that middle age range. He was not very old at all.
Do you have more questions?
No? Okay. I have some things I thought might be fun. Cool. Let's start with some Victorian etiquette. Okay. Now I gotta go back to my... And I might need some participation, so please be ready for that. All right, actually, so I want to talk about summer rep a little bit because it has been on a 2-year hiatus and I just have loved being a part of it. So Iowa Summer Rep is back. It was on a 2-year hiatus for like flood reconstruction. But this used to be like a regular part of Iowa City in the summers, ever since like the 20s or something crazy like that. People would gather to come to these plays. And this summer we're only doing one, but people would gather in the summer to come to these plays and just enjoy theater in the summer. And it's a good way of melding the educational and the professional aspects at the University of Iowa, which I have just found very cool to be a part of, myself, a recent graduate of the university. But onward to Ernest itself. So these are more pictures from the first production, and I don't know, what do you guys notice about it? What are you thinking about it? What does it look like? And if you've seen the show, like, how is it different? Yeah.
I know some of it was also touched on in the post-show talk on Sunday, but how like the costume designer Jenny took some liberties with the period, like some of the dress silhouettes and things. Especially, I know you were doing slightly anachronistically in order to be able to just have more fun with it and sort of accentuate it.
Yeah.
In a way, instead of like recreating like these exactly, which I think works well for performance.
Yeah, totally, definitely. I think it's a good idea the costume designer did take her own interpretation upon it and made it a little more contemporary. Because as you can always do like a period piece, but I think what makes this piece so malleable is the fact that you can adjust it to include more modern things like costume or set. Yeah, I just find these photos fascinating because this is just when photos were starting to become a thing.
Common then to photograph the actual performances,
Back then,
like as photographs were starting then.
I'm not sure actually. Yeah, I don't know if it was very common. They definitely did for this. I'm sure they did for others. But yeah, there's only like 4 or 5 photos from the original production even available at all, compared to like I'm showing you this is like our show. Spoiler alert. This is our set. So if you haven't seen it, you should definitely go see it. And if you haven't finished seeing it, you should go back and finish seeing it. It's absolutely beautiful. It was designed by Nick Wilson. And he took a lot of inspiration, I'm told, from the Crystal Palace in the UK, which I thought was cool. All right, so we're going to get to some etiquette stuff right now. All right, I need a volunteer. You're just wearing gloves.
I mean, I can wear gloves.
Great. Put on some gloves.
I would love to put on some gloves. Do the snaps then?
You could, or I never do.
Great.
Fantastic.
Small hands. So.
No, it works. So what do you all think you're supposed to do with your gloves? Like, when do you wear them, when do you don't? Like, what do you do? What's glove wear in Victorian times? Shout it out. Feel free to take a guess.
You wear them outside and take them off inside?
Correct. It's that simple. Yeah, okay. So when you're outside, you're always going to wear gloves, unless you're maybe at a tea party in a garden, then you wouldn't necessarily wear gloves. But when you're inside, you always take your gloves off. And so in this shot, we have one of the characters, Lady Bracknell, giving her gloves to the servant. So I'll be the servant.
Great. Do I just
Yeah.
take them off any particular way, or
Yeah, just fingers.
fingers? And, okay.
Very elegant.
I'm not very elegant.
And can I get your name?
Merrick Bauer.
Mr. Merrick Bauer has just entered the room. Thanks. Very simple, very fun. All right. Okay, here's another little quiz. These are two young lovers in the play. What are an unmarried man and an unmarried woman supposed to do in a room alone together in Victorian England?
Not be?
Right, exactly. Not be, nothing. They should not be in a room alone together. So if you're going to see the play, keep track of how many times this rule is broken in the play, because Wilde breaks it a lot. And it's actually very fascinating. A woman should be accompanied, usually by her mother or some other elderly woman of some years, if she is going anywhere alone. And a woman should yes, sorry.
Oh, I was wondering about that then. If they can't be alone together, then we're... Great. If they aren't supposed to be alone together like that, then would, like, courting and marriage proposals and stuff be then in front of that, like, older woman
Yes.
all the time?
Yep.
So it's not quite private.
Yep. Courting and marriage proposals were always supposed to be in front of the parents, and most oftentimes the parents would actually still arrange it, even if, like, say the young couple was in love or had an attraction to each other. The man would still have to ask permission from the woman's parents in order to propose to her in the first place. So it was very, like, formal and very conventional and not at all romantic at all, I think. And something really interesting that Wilde does in the play is these prenuptial interviews. And so this happens in the first act as well, so spoiler alert. But this is the public library talk and not the pre-show talk, so I can do whatever I want. But let me see here what I've written down. All right, so So the prenuptial interviews were a way for the woman's parents to find out how wealthy the man was and if their daughter was going to be well provided for. So in the play, Jack Worthing, on the right, is interrogated by a lovely Lady Bracknell there in the green about Gwendolyn on the left, like how steady their income would be. And she's quite satisfied until she finds out a piece of Jack's past, which I will leave a secret for you. All right. Okay, tea time. This is my favorite. I love tea time. I love talking about tea time. We're going to have some fun here. Okay, there's so much stuff. Does anyone know how to properly drink from a teacup in Victorian England? Take a guess. Yeah.
The pinky thing people make fun of?
No pinky.
Great.
The pinky, that is a big misconception, especially in America, of course. So that's been romanticized in film and in theater, but the Victorians actually balanced the handle between their thumb and their index finger, or they held it between that, would balance it against their middle finger, and then hold the cup and sip. And you would not pick up the saucer usually. That really wasn't a thing. You would just pick the cup up from the saucer and put it back down where it is on the table. And the reason they picked it up like that was because sometimes the teacups didn't have handles because they were trying to mimic Chinese cups, and so it wouldn't have a handle, and they would just drink without it. And then when the cups developed handles, they would drink it. So nope, because the pinky was like not good because it didn't provide any balance for the cup. You would definitely spill your tea if you had your pinky out. All right, let's see. Okay, this is really obscure. Who is supposed to serve tea? The servant, right? You think, no? Hostess, yeah. It's supposed to be the hostess. And fun fact, the teapot is supposed to be placed with the spout facing the hostess. That was like a rule. So watch for that in the play because it definitely does happen. So then the hostess could reach around to the handle to serve tea. But the spout indicated the hostess. All right. And then this is another obscure one that I really love. So the aristocracy would pour in their tea first and then their milk, but servants would pour in their milk first. Why do you think that would be?
Because the pottery or the porcelain wasn't as
Right. Right. Yeah, the servants didn't have as nice of china that the aristocracy did, and so, yeah, we've been messing with the mic. So servants didn't have as nice of cups as the aristocracy did, and so they would pour milk in to cool off the cup before the tea was poured in so that the cup wouldn't break under all the hot liquid. I think that's my last photo. Okay. Yeah, any questions?
I wanted to say that Oscar Wilde actually lectured in Iowa City. I don't know if you knew that.
Really? I didn't know that.
In 1882. So he was on these big American tours to
Yep.
earn
Yeah.
money, and so he lectured in Iowa City.
I didn't know he came to Iowa City. I knew he came through the Midwest. Wow, 1882. I'm going to research that. If anyone's curious, I do have some copies of the dramaturgical packet I made for the actors if you are really feeling the Oscar Wilde stuff. I know I'm being a complete nerd right now. I just love doing this. Yeah, does anyone have any questions about Victorian etiquette, things like that? Yeah.
Wait,
Well,
wait.
microphone and then,
No question?
No.
Okay.
okay. Questions?
So is
Yeah.
the costuming appropriate to the time in this play?
The costuming took some more modern liberties, but I know the costume designer, Jenny, used kind of the basis of like the Victorian dress in order to develop her costumes, but I know she added like a lot more patterns, especially to like the men. Men wouldn't really wear patterns, but we have some patterns for Algernon in the play because Algernon's the more eccentric character. And then a lot of floral patterns, but floral patterns were also really common, mostly for like curtains or like calling cards, stuff like that, not really for dresses in Victorian times, but we also have a floral dress in the play too.
And is the language changed at all, or is it? No,
Same language. Yeah.
Wait.
So I was wondering especially about tea, and that I know from the play how Gwendolyn makes a point of what is and isn't fashionable to like eat and drink at tea. And I was wondering how much that like, I don't know, I find it personally kind of funny that like food being fashionable as opposed to like taste or whatnot, but I guess how is that, it wasn't like regulated, but like, is that just something that passed around circles and everyone like figured out what so-and-so's doing or like?
Yeah. A lot of time talking was spent on what was either fashionable or what isn't, or like what someone was up to. Not necessarily like their personal life, but like kind of, light gossip. The Victorians didn't really like to talk about anything serious, so a trivial comedy for serious people, like the importance of being earnest. But I also think for those lines in the play of Gwendolyn being like, oh no, like that is not fashionable anymore, is Wilde making fun of how quickly everyone's tastes were changing. Whoops, I am receiving a call. Yeah, I think that is more Wilde making fun of how fast these people were moving through their interests and tastes and how trivial it all actually really was. Like, does it really matter that like tea cake isn't fashionable anymore, but bread and butter is? Like, what's the point of that? Nothing, but he wanted to poke fun at it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Okay, cool. Anything?
Why'd you bring the hat?
Normally I wear the hat to begin my pre-show talk to say hello, but I guess I could put it on to say goodbye as well. Actually, I'll say goodbye in a second. This is the last activity. I need someone who wants to be Oscar Wilde.
I'll do it again. I don't want to deprive anyone.
Merrick's all about it. And someone who wants to be a prosecutor. I'll be the prosecutor. You'll be Wilde.
Yeah, go for it.
You got to come up here.
Does he need a microphone?
Yes.
Here.
Do you have a good British accent, sir?
No, I do not.
All right, so this is actually a transcript from Wilde's trial. And this was, obviously, what's your name?
My name is Oscar Wilde.
Okay. What's your real name?
My name's Keegan.
Yeah, Keegan.
Gormley.
Yep. Keegan will be reading for Oscar Wilde, and I'll be Edward Carson, one of Wilde's prosecutors. And actually, Edward Carson was also a classmate of Wilde's at Trinity College and never liked him and disliked him so much, came to prosecute him in his trial for gross indecency.
Is he related at all to Elizabeth Carson?
I don't know.
Did a lot with.
Yeah, I don't know that. All these things I still need to learn about it. Are you ready? And are you going to do a British accent?
I'm gonna follow your lead. Fine. Yeah.
I'm not, so, okay.
I'm not.
You're of the opinion, I believe, that there is no such thing as an immoral book.
Yes.
Am I right in saying that you do not consider the effect in creating morality or immorality?
Certainly, I do not.
So far as your works are concerned, you pose as not being concerned about morality or immorality?
I do not know whether to use the word pose in any particular sense.
It is a favorite word of your own.
Is it? I have no pose in this matter. In writing a play or book, I am concerned entirely with literature, that is, with art. I aim not at doing good or evil, but in trying to make a thing that will have some quality or form or beauty or wit.
This is your introduction to Dorian Gray. There is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all. That expresses your view?
My view on art, yes.
Then I take it that no matter how immoral a book may be, if it is well written, it is, in your opinion, a good book?
Yes, if it were well written so as to produce a sense of beauty, which is the highest sense of which a human being can be capable. If it were badly written, it would produce a sense of disgust.
Then a well-written book putting forth perverted moral views may be a good book?
No work of art ever puts forward views. Views belong to people who are not artists.
And that's what landed Oscar Wilde in jail. Thank you. Any last questions? Otherwise, I'll say goodbye. Okay, cool. Thanks for coming. Obviously, I'm putting this on. Put your hat and your gloves back on before you leave. To say hello or goodbye, you would tip your hat like that, do a little bow, women would curtsy. So feel free when you stand up to bow if you liked it, and if you didn't, just leave. Thank you.